Hello, my dear sleepy listener. You've come seeking something gentle, haven't you? A soft place to rest your mind, a calm voice to accompany you through time. So let me take your hand in spirit and guide you slowly, quietly, through the flickering shadows of one of history's lesser sung but radiant empires, the Sassanid Empire of Persia. Tonight, you'll walk beneath domed ceilings and firelit halls, follow the rhythm of scholars and kings, and listen for the faint rustle of silk drifting across desert roads. Before you drift away into peaceful slumber, please take a moment to like this video, leave a gentle comment about your favourite historical moment, and subscribe to keep these soothing tales coming your way. If you'd like, let us know where and when you're listening from your city and time zone, whispered across the stars. Now, dim the lights, settle in, and let these gentle whispers of history lull you into sleep. You awaken in the arid highlands of early 3rd century Persia, in the year 224 AD. The world smells faintly of dust and myrrh, and the hills are gold with dry grass. The once mighty Parthian Empire is fading, a tapestry unravelling thread by thread, and beneath the low clang of blacksmiths' hammers, a new name stirs the air like a storm cloud rolling in Ardashir. He is not yet a king, not officially, but in the streets of Istaka, his rise is whispered with reverence and dread. You stand among market stalls where figs sit heavy in the sun, and cloth merchants argue softly over indigo dye, and everyone has an opinion about this man. They say he's descended from ancient Achaemenid kings, or at least he says so. Some scoff, others believe. All are watching. The Parthians, you learn, are stretched thin. For centuries they ruled through a loose confederation of noble families, each powerful in their region. But Ardashir is different. He dreams not of coalitions, but of consolidation of flame and crown, temple and sword bound together. You ride out with his growing army. It's a modest force at first, a patchwork of local lords and Zoroastrian loyalists, but it swells quickly, like a desert fire caught in wind. The decisive clash comes near Hormozgan, where the Parthian king Artabanus IV meets Ardashir in open battle. You wait near a ridgeline, the sun at your back, watching the dust rise as horses pound the earth, and then it happens. A swift strike, a deadly rout. The Parthian king is slain. Some say he was pierced by a long spear. Others claim he was betrayed by his own nobles. Historians still question the exact moment the tide turned, but turned it did. By evening, a new empire is born from the ashes of the old. You travel to Ctesiphon, the ancient twin city by the Tigris, where Ardashir is crowned not simply as king, but as King of Kings of Iran, and non-Iran a title both expansive and deliberate. A bright red carpet unfurls along the palace floor, and the fire altars burn steadily as prayers rise with the smoke. The priests of Zoroaster are smiling. At your side, a temple scribe leans in and quietly confides that the new king has ordered histories to be rewritten, names rearranged, titles elevated, ancestry enhanced. For unity, the scribe says. But you wonder what stories are being erased beneath the ink. Still, the mood is one of cautious celebration. Across the empire, coins are recast with new symbols, eagles, crowns, flames. Artisans carve Ardashir's likeness into stone, often taller than life. In one famous relief, he is shown receiving the royal diadem directly from Ahura Mazda, the Zoroastrian god himself. Is it theology, or political theatre. You dine by firelight that night, beneath a tent of purple silk. The stars above Persia shimmer like 1,000 unlit temples. Ardashir sits quietly near the centre, his crown a strange blend of Parthian form and something older Achaemenid, perhaps. You cannot tell if he's thinking of the past or the future. The empire feels both ancient and newborn. Its roots stretch back to Cyrus and Darius, yet its branches reach toward uncharted skies. And as you settle on your woven mat beneath the stars, you wonder how long this new fire will burn this empire of temples, kings, and whispers. The night deepens. The sacred fire never sleeps. You awaken with the early hush of dawn. The light in Persia always a little honey-coloured, as if the sun itself is remembering something. Today, your path winds through the heart of Ardashir's growing realm, where stone and spirit entwine the cities, the fire temples, the courtly processions that now define a resurgent empire. You pass through Gore, later called Firuzabad, nestled in a wide valley shaped by the ambitions of the Sassanid crown. It's not like the cities of Rome, or even the sprawling Parthian capitals. It is deliberate, geometric, a spiralling grid thought to have sacred resonance. From above, you're told, the layout mimics a wheel turning endlessly around a central hub, the heart of the empire, perhaps, or the throne of Ahura Mazda. Historians still debate whether the city's design was more mystical than practical, or simply an exercise in regal grandeur. Either way, it's unlike anything you've seen. You drift through wide avenues framed by plastered walls and mosaic floors. At their centre, dominating all, stand the newly completed fire temples. One in particular draws you in with its layered fragrance of cedar smoke and rosewater. Inside, Zoroastrian priests tend to the eternal flame carefully, reverently. Their white robes rustle softly as they move in a measured circle, preserving the purity of the sacred fire. You learn that the flame isn't just symbolic, it is the very soul of the empire. To let it die would be a spiritual disaster, akin to the fall of a city. Later, in a small chamber near the temple, you join a gathering of scholars, young acolytes discussing not just theology, but astronomy, medicine, and law. One student clutches a worn scroll and excitedly explains that the Empire is trying to collect and preserve ancient Avestan texts. These writings, thought to date back to Zoroaster himself, had been scattered and partially lost during the Parthian era. Now, they're being recompiled. Or at least, that's the hope. But not everything is so neatly preserved. The scholars speak in hushed tones of volumes that are gone burned, stolen, or simply forgotten. Some believe they were lost in ancient fires. Others suggest they were never written down in the first place. We're chasing whispers. One girl sighs, folding the edge of her robe beneath her knees. But maybe the truth is meant to be whispered. You leave the temple beneath a soft sunset. The golden light falls across domed rooftops and public gardens, where jasmine curls over mud brick walls. This is a city that feels like a prayer-structured, fragrant, and quietly alive. In the distance, musicians play a slow melody on a chang, the Persian harp, as families sit on rooftop cushions to share dried fruit and warm bread. You notice the fire temples remain visible from almost every rooftop, their glowing cores quietly pulsing through the city's veins. And yet, for all the serene order, you sense an undercurrent of unease. A court advisor, too old to be listened to but too respected to ignore, murmurs beside you. What begins with fire often ends in smoke. He means it kindly, but you tuck the words away. As twilight deepens, you visit a newly constructed hall just outside the city, a training ground for the imperial bureaucracy. Rows of students in crisp linen tunics recite laws, record tax ledgers, and trace routes across fragile maps. Ardashir knows that a strong empire isn't just built on victories, it is sustained by accountants, governors, and scribes. The soldiers may win the land, but it is the parchment that keeps it. One young scribe, eager to impress, tells you that the new imperial system is merging old Persian traditions with more structured administration. We're blending fire with ink, he says, grinning. You smile, watching him copy a land decree with careful strokes. But you also notice that some of the older teachers are Parthians, still holding on to a different rhythm of rule. They teach quietly, perhaps wondering how long they'll be welcome in a system that no longer bears their name. As night falls, you return to the temple one last time. The eternal flame glows steadily, undisturbed. Yet outside, the winds shift. You hear rumours that Ardashir is beginning to turn his eyes beyond Persia, to Roman lands, to Arabia, to the east. But here, in the centre of the empire, the fire still burns. You lie down under a vaulted ceiling painted in star-like motifs, breathing in the scent of saffron and old parchment. Somewhere in the city, a child recites a prayer to the holy flame, and the words drift faintly through the walls, lulling you into stillness. You awaken to the rhythmic thunder of hooves and the jangle of bronze harnesses. The sun has barely lifted over the horizon, but already the desert air thrums with tension. You are not in the peaceful cities now. You're with the cavalry of Shapur I, Ardashir's bold and brilliant son, and the scent of oiled leather and dust fills your lungs. Shapur has inherited not just the throne, but the fire of ambition. He is taller than most, broad-shouldered, with a presence that silences a room even before he speaks. You've seen him before in court, calm, thoughtful, a philosopher king in the making. But here, on the open plains, with Rome's eastern provinces in sight, he is all steel and resolve. It is the 240s now, and Rome's eastern frontier is quivering. The emperors in the west have grown distracted, dealing with plague, internal rebellions, and short-lived reigns. Shapur sees a chance, not just for raids, but for conquest. You ride with his forces across the Tigris, toward Roman Mesopotamia. Cities fall with startling speed: Hatra, Cari, and Nisibis. The Roman legions attempt to counter, but their numbers are thin and their command fractured. Shapur, in contrast, is meticulous. He knows how to strike just where the enemy is weakest. And then comes the moment that will echo through centuries: the Battle of Edessa in 260 AD. You stand behind Shapur on a low rise, watching dust swirl over a field crowded with armoured elephants, cataphracts, and long, undulating lines of Persian infantry. Across the plain, the Roman Emperor Valerian has arrayed his legions, grim-faced and uncertain. He's here to push back, to remind the Sassanids of Rome's supremacy. But Shapur has prepared too well. The Roman lines crumble, their formations falter in the heat. You see confusion ripple across the Roman ranks, and then, astonishingly, Valerian is captured, taken alive. You blink, unsure if you've heard correctly. It feels impossible. A Roman emperor, a living Caesar, in chains. It is true. The details remain hazy to this day. Did Valerian surrender willingly? Was he tricked during peace talks? Historians still debate whether it was strategy or betrayal. But the outcome is certain. Valerian is marched through Persian cities in shackles, a living symbol of Rome's vulnerability. You witness the victory parade in Ctesiphon. Shapur rides tall upon his steed, flanked by musicians, priests, and noblemen. Valerian is forced to walk behind, robed in humiliation. Later, stories will circulate of the emperor being used as a human stepping stool, Shapur allegedly mounting his horse by planting a foot on the Roman's bent back. Is it fact or myth? You can't say. The air is too thick with incense and disbelief. What you do know is that Shapur I becomes something more than a king. In carvings at Rustam, you see him immortalized in stone, grasping the wrist of a kneeling Valerian while the Roman Philip the Arab gestures in surrender. These rock reliefs, carved high above the desert floor, are not subtle. They are declarations. Yet, amidst the triumph, there are gentler moments. You attend a gathering of artisans in Bishapur, where Shapur sponsors Roman prisoners not as slaves, but as builders. With their help, he constructs palaces, bridges, and a fusion of styles that will ripple through Persian architecture. Mosaic floors appear where none had before. Arches curve in ways new to Persian stonework. A strange kind of cultural osmosis begins. You meet one of these Roman captives, a stonemason from Antioch. He tells you, almost proudly, of the aqueduct he helped design, and how Shapur pays his men in gold and fine clothing. It's not home, he says, but the water runs clean, and the bread is sweet. Later that evening, as twilight washes the palace walls in blue, you watch Shapur stand alone near the fire altar. He does not smile, even in victory. His brow is furrowed, as though he knows this glory, like all things, is fleeting. In the years that follow, he strengthens internal reforms, builds new cities, and protects the Zoroastrian clergy. But also, perhaps, he becomes more cautious. His campaigns grow shorter, his speeches more reserved. A great ruler, but one who has seen how fast empires fall, even Roman ones. You lie down that night beneath a Roman-style arch in a Persian-built hall, the breeze humming through the lattice. In your dreams, a Roman eagle and a Persian lion rest beside the same fire. You awaken at the base of a mountain face, where the rising sun reveals a gallery of gods and kings carved straight into the cliff. The rock is warm beneath your hand, almost humming with memory. Here at Rustam, just outside Persepolis, you are not in the presence of ruins, but of deliberate monuments, where Sassanid rulers have etched their victories into stone so the wind cannot erase them. The reliefs are immense, towering over travellers like divine murals. You look up to see Shapur I again, this time not in person, but immortalized in stone. His horse rears slightly, his robes carved in rippling waves of triumph. Valerian kneels forever at his feet, and you feel a strange hush fall over the mountain. This isn't just history, it's theatre, staged on a cliff. Sassanid kings understood something crucial. While armies might falter and cities might fall, stone speaks for ages. These carvings, called investiture scenes, don't merely tell stories, they broadcast legitimacy. To be king is not only to rule, but to perform the past, to script one's own myth. You walk from one relief to another, each depicting a ritual or victory, always with the king at the centre and the divine light radiating outward. You notice how similar they are to earlier Achaemenid carvings, especially those at Persepolis. There's a conscious mirroring, as if the Sassanids are reaching back through time to link themselves with Persia's ancient golden age. And yet, not all the depictions are triumphal. One relief, worn down by time, shows a quiet coronation. Ahura Mazda, the supreme deity, is handing a diadem to the king. It is not loud or boastful, just two figures standing in profile, hands extended in a divine handshake. There's something reverent in it. You linger there longest. Later, you meet a stonemason who has worked on a lesser-known site nearby. He shows you sketches on parchment drafts of figures, curved lines for royal beards, geometric borders meant to frame the divine. You ask how the kings choose what to depict. He shrugs, smiling. They choose what they want remembered, he says. You think about that. The grandeur is unmistakable, but so is the control. No defeats are shown, no famines, no unrest. These carvings aren't so much a reflection of truth as a polished echo. Historians still debate how accurate these depictions are, whether Valerian really knelt so neatly, whether the divine hand was truly visible at coronations, whether these events unfolded exactly as shown, but accuracy isn't the point. The carvings are part of the imperial rhythm crown, flame, conquest, repeat. As the day warms, you travel with a caravan moving northward. Merchants speak of the growing spread of such imagery, smaller reliefs near provincial cities. Fire temples adorned with crowned kings rather than anonymous priests. It's a change, one that emphasizes the fusion of religious authority and royal rule. You begin to notice how even coinage mirrors these reliefs. Shapur's image appears frequently, always with regal posture, often with fire altars nearby, a flick of gold, and the story is told again, I am king, I am chosen, I am flame. And yet, in private homes and village shrines, different stories whisper beneath the surface. You hear local tales of kings who listened to dreams, of a royal gardener who cured an entire city with basil and salt. One elder tells you of a night when the sacred fire refused to light, and birds circled the temple 3 times. A warning, he says, though of what no one is sure. You travel on, eventually reaching Bishapur, a city Shapur helped build, where Roman captives still labour in carved stone courtyards. You watch as artists blend Greco-Roman style with Persian themes. Vines and grape clusters wind beside fire altars, and human figures appear with more depth than traditional Persian art would normally allow. The young artist tells you he's been asked to recreate the king's likeness, but softer, more reflective. Not everything must shout, he says. Sometimes the whisper lasts longer. That night, you find a quiet spot beneath the cliffs. The stars hang overhead, and the carved kings above you seem to glow faintly in the moonlight. You wonder how many travellers will pass this way, how many will gaze upward and believe every line of stone to be true. You drift asleep with the mountain watching over you, and the fire of memory still burning in its ancient veins. You awaken inside a temple, warm with amber light and the quiet crackle of flame. The walls are thick, blocking the wind entirely, and the air holds the scent of sandalwood and burnt myrtle. You're in the presence of a sacred fire tended constantly, reverently, by white-robed priests who move like drifting clouds. This is a Zoroastrian fire temple, one of hundreds now dotting the empire. Under the Sassanids, Zoroastrianism is no longer merely a faith, it is the backbone of the state. You sit cross-legged beside the fire, its steady shimmer casting gold across your cheeks, and listen to the morning prayers spoken in ancient Avestan. Each word is rhythmic, carefully intoned, as if to preserve not just tradition but cosmic balance. Outside, you hear the low rustle of villagers bringing offerings, bundles of twigs, small coins, a dish of honeyed dates. The temple is simple by royal standards, yet alive with reverence. One child leaves a dried pomegranate, her face solemn. A priest blesses her softly, touching her forehead with the edge of his stole. You're invited to walk the perimeter, where holy texts are copied by hand under flickering oil lamps. The Avestan script is narrow, delicate. You learn that the priests are engaged in something called Urbadistan, a hierarchy of religious learning. Only those who memorize the Gathas, the most sacred hymns, can rise. But something else lingers beneath the orderly reverence questions. During an evening gathering in the priest quarters, scholars debate not only the moral dualism between Ahura Mazda and Angra, but subtler mysteries. Did Zoroaster truly live centuries ago, as tradition holds? Or was he closer to the time of Cyrus the Great? Was the original Avesta truly transmitted orally for generations, or has much of it been reconstructed with generous imagination? You sip warm milk as the fire dims, and one elderly priest admits, some parts are clearer than others. But faith, like fire, burns brightest when tended even if we do not see the wick. Outside, the fire temples have become part of the imperial landscape. They're built at road junctions, near towns, and often funded by local nobles hoping to tie themselves to divine favour. The sacred fires are classified. You learn Atash Dadga for common use, Atash Adaran for regional importance, and the most sacred Atash Behram reserved for imperial purity. But maintaining purity is a full-time task. You watch a priest carefully wash his hands, then his mouth, before approaching the flame. Even the wood is selected with care, no dead or diseased branches. A fire, after all, can be contaminated. And once it is, the consequences echo into the spiritual world. You're surprised to find that fire temples are not entirely sombre. In rural communities, they're also social centres. Families gather outside on holy days, sharing gossip and lentils while waiting for rituals to conclude. One man tells you, laughing softly, that his uncle once fell asleep during a festival sermon and snored so loudly that even the goats turned to look. The priest blessed him anyway. You wander through one temple district where artisans carve fire altars into stone ledges. Even the coins you trade bear the same symbol, a central flame flanked by two attendants. You begin to realize that the Sassanid idea of empire is this flame and structure, holiness and hierarchy. It is less about conquest now, and more about maintenance. And still, not all believe. One night, you overhear a quiet conversation in a shaded corner of the temple garden. A traveller from the eastern frontier speaks with a young priest. "In our village," the traveller whispers, "we remember a time before this fire. We still leave food for the old gods, quietly." The priest doesn't scold him. He just nods and replies, "Sometimes the old gods visit through new flames." That moment stays with you. Because while the Sassanid state officially champions Zoroastrianism, reality is layered. In some places, local cults persist. In others, Judaism, Christianity, and even Manichaean teachings thrive quietly, especially in larger cities. The empire is more pluralistic than its marble inscriptions suggest. As night falls, you find a spot beside a lesser flame. It flickers, uncertain in the breeze, before steadying itself again. Like the Empire, you think resilient, ritual-bound, always rekindling. You close your eyes, listening to the coals crackle, and let the temple's warmth carry you into sleep. You awaken to the faint tremble of unrest beneath royal marble, beneath the ritual chants. The firm rule, the fire. Not all is as steady as the sacred flames would suggest. The court of Persia has grown complicated. The rituals continue, but the succession has faltered. It is a time of quiet crisis. The great Shapur I is gone. His passing leaves behind a heavy crown and a fragile balance. You sit now in the audience hall of his son Hormizd, whose reign is barely unfolding before it begins to flicker out. He is capable, but fate does not allow him long. Just a year upon the throne, and then gone. Illness, perhaps, or poisoned. No one says it aloud, but the court whispers at night. You walk the marble corridors as names change faster than the paint can dry on new inscriptions. Bahram. I rise as next less a bold leader than a figure moulded by the priestly class. You see him leaning on the council of Cartier, a high-ranking Zoroastrian cleric with intense eyes and an unwavering tone. The empire begins to tilt, gently but firmly, toward religious consolidation. It's Cartier who writes his own messages in stone rare for a non-royal figure. You read them carved into cliff faces, proclamations of his role, his power, his favour from the gods. In one, he boasts of stamping out heresy. You glance at a nearby Christian trader who lowers his eyes and tightens his grip on a small pouch of scripture. Historians still question how much power Cartier really had. Was he the true force behind the throne, or simply a convenient mouthpiece for royal decisions already made? His own inscription suggests the former, but inscriptions, like memories, are rarely neutral. You notice that the court has grown quieter, less laughter in the halls, more guards at the doors. The great festivals continue, lavish processions of garlanded horses, sweet pomegranate wine, gold-threaded banners, but the joy feels rehearsed. Then comes Bahram II, Behram the Tame. You first hear his name not in the throne room, but from a singer in a village square, a king who fears the falcon's dive. She hums, plucking gently at her harp. He is not as weak as rumour suggests, but nor is he decisive. You sit in on his council, where governors murmur cautiously and Cartier's influence continues to rise. The king is more comfortable with patronage than politics. He sponsors rock reliefs that show his family, his queen, his son, and even Cartier himself, engraved in stone beside the royal line. It is unusual. It is deliberate. You walk the provinces and see another side of the Empire rebellions flickering on the edges. In Sakistan, a royal brother named Hormizd rebels. In Khuzestan, the people grumble about taxation. You see troops deployed not just to borders, but to villages. Peace is being guarded, not felt. And then there is the pestilence. It rolls through the cities like dry wind through tall reeds, subtle at first, then consuming. You find yourself in a dusty medical ward in Ctesiphon. There are no masks, no understanding of contagion-only water, prayers, and amulets against the unseen. A healer, her hands raw from boiling cloth, tells you softly that more die of fear than fever. You help for a time bringing dates and linens, fanning a child whose mother weeps silently beside her. In a corner, a priest chants over the sacred fire, hoping flame can shield what medicine cannot. Some say the plague is divine punishment. Others blame foreign merchants. You just watch the city quiet, its noise and colour reduced to a muted thrum. And then, just as suddenly, things shift again. A comet appears in the sky. You see it from a rooftop where a nobleman clutches a prayer book and refuses to look up. It's a bad omen, he mutters. Always is. In time, Bahram II dies, and the succession is no less uncertain than before. His son, Bahram III, reigns only briefly before being pushed aside by a cousin. The throne feels less like a seat of power and more like a rotating platform, still gilded, still guarded, but unstable at its core. You take solace in the things that do endure. The fire temples still burn, the bazaars still hum. In rural villages, a child still learns the prayers her mother once whispered over lentils and honeyed figs. The empire is not broken, but it is tired. That night, you rest beneath a canopy in a quiet town. The stars press gently overhead. Somewhere, far off, a royal decree is being rewritten. But here, the fire is small, the air sweet, and the worries of kings drift slowly into smoke. You awaken to the rhythm of galloping hooves closer now, stronger than before. A new king rides at the head of the procession, sunlight flashing off his polished armour. You shield your eyes and watch him approach Bahram II's son. Bahram IV has come and gone, but now it is Bahram V who holds the empire's reins. They call him Bahram Gur, Gur meaning onager, the wild Persian ass, fleet and untamed. It's a nickname from a hunting story, of course, how he once slew a monstrous beast with a single arrow while still a prince. The tale is told with relish in courtly poems and humble market songs alike. You hear it in every province, from fire-lit courts to desert caravans. Whether it's true or not, no one seems to mind. You find yourself at his coronation, one of the more theatrical affairs the empire's staged. Saffron-scented oil is poured across the stone floor, and robed servants cast rose petals down from balconies. Musicians play a long, echoing melody on reed flutes as the crown is placed gently on Bahram's head. But beneath the music and myth, there is substance. Bahram V inherits an empire weary of instability. The court is divided. Priests still hold sway, and the memory of Kartir's stern reign lingers like incense in old tapestries. You observe Bahram carefully. He does not challenge the clergy directly, but neither does he let them rule. He walks a fine line, with the easy charm of a man who understands both politics and poetry. You travel with him to the frontiers, where Arab tribes threaten trade routes near the empire's southwestern borders. In the blistering heat of the desert, Bahram's troops push forward. It's not a campaign of conquest, but containment. Fortresses are reinforced, roads are repaired. His goal is not glory, it is stability. And yet, there's a whimsical side to this king. One evening, you find yourself seated under a full moon at a courtly gathering near Shapur. The air is heavy with spiced wine and laughter. Bahram listens to a court poet sing of love and seasons, of silver eyes and jasmine-filled gardens. Later, the king himself rises and recites a verse from memory, something about the fleeting joy of spring and the foolishness of ambition. Someone whispers that he once disguised himself as a servant to wander among the people unnoticed. Another claims he met a girl by a riverside and offered her his ring, never revealing who he was. You cannot confirm these tales, but they cling to him like well-worn silk. Still, not all is joy. Tensions remain with the Hephthalites in the northeast. You travel with scouts who speak of sudden raids and shifting alliances. One day, a commander shows you a captured standard stitched in the Hephthalite's curved, cryptic script. They ride in silence, he warns. Even their horses know when to hold their breath. Back at court, Bahram's reforms continue. He orders the reduction of harsh taxes on farmers, encourages musical education, and funds translations of old stories into Middle Persian. You watch scribes in long robes carefully copy verses once sung in Greek or Sanskrit, now reshaped for the ears of the Persian court. One day, a court official chuckles and tells you of Bahram's fondness for music and animals. He brought an Indian elephant into his private garden once, he says, fed it peaches from his own hand, then wrote a poem about its loneliness. Later, as you sit beneath a fig tree near Ctesiphon, a merchant shares a curious tale that Bahram once disappeared into the desert while hunting, and was never seen again, his body lost, his soul taken by the sands. Or perhaps he rode into a paradise of his own making, the merchant adds with a wink. Historians still argue about the manner of Bahram's death. Some say he died in battle. Others say he vanished, leaving the empire to speculate. But all agree on one thing. His reign was a pause in the turbulence, a breath of grace. That night, you rest beneath a silk canopy by the river, the moon bright and full. The water murmurs softly as you remember Bahram's poem, "Drink while the cup is full, for even the stars are not eternal." And so you drift, as stars blink slowly overhead, and the last of the rose petals scatter into the dusk. You awaken to wind, dreary and hot, sweeping over a broad eastern plain. The horizon stretches far beyond what your eyes can hold. Mountains like faded charcoal, rivers like thin silver threads. You're far from the heart of Persia now. You ride along the empire's eastern frontier, where boundaries blur and new powers stir. This is the edge of the Sassanid realm, where the familiar rhythms of Zoroastrian prayer give way to Buddhist chants, and where Persian script appears beside Kushan inscriptions. Trade caravans wind like insects across the steppe, their goods bundled tightly in waxed leather silk from China, lapis from Bactria, even pepper from lands too distant to name. You're travelling with a Sassanid envoy, sharp-eyed, sun-scorched, his scroll case stuffed with decrees. His task is delicate monitor alliances or quell small rebellions, and remind the outer lords whose flame still burns in the capital. But all is not well in the east. You hear of raids from nomadic groups, the Hephtalites, sometimes called the White Huns. They move fast, never staying long, disrupting trade and slipping away before local garrisons can respond. Ghosts, one soldier calls them, adjusting his spear. They ride like wind and vanish like dreams. You stop at a frontier fort near present-day Afghanistan. It's a mosaic of cultures. Zoroastrian priests tend a modest fire temple near a stupa, where monks in saffron robes chant beneath a flowering tree. In the marketplace, Persian merchants haggle with Kushan traders over bolts of dyed cotton. The food is a blend of everything lentils, honeyed bread, and spiced dumplings from a northern recipe you've never tasted. Despite its diversity, there's tension in the air. A local governor complains that the court in Ctesiphon sends orders but no aid. His soldiers are stretched thin, his scribes overwhelmed with disputes over land, taxes, and language. One night, you sit beside a watchtower with a border scout. He tells you a strange tale of lights moving across the desert sky, silent and flickering. We followed them once, he whispers, found nothing but a circle of ash, no footsteps, no sound. You smile, expecting jest. But his eyes remain serious, whether it was raiders, trickery, or something older. No one knows. Some say the eastern deserts are haunted by forgotten gods. Others say the empire's edges are where reality frays. Back in the court, a new ruler has risen, Yazdegerd the Sioux. You catch glimpses of his decrees from afar, efforts to standardize worship, strengthen taxation, and reassert authority. His rule is capable, even sharp, but the tension between center and frontier remains. And still, the eastern world shifts. The Sogdians, traders and translators of the Silk Road, gain more influence. You meet one in a tea house, where he shares stories of cities buried in sand and markets where Chinese scrolls are sold beside Persian talismans. The road is older than any king, he tells you, smiling. It listens only to merchants. Historians still debate how much control the Sassanids truly had over these eastern lands. Were they directly ruled, or were they tributary states, loosely tied to the empire by coin and ceremony? The records are inconsistent. Even the royal inscriptions grow vague when speaking of the East. And yet, these margins matter. You watch as a caravan prepares to cross toward the Tarim Basin. Silk, salt, and horses, all tied with hemp cords and tiny wax seals. A priest blesses the journey, but the travellers rely more on luck and wind than on holy fire. As night falls, you sit beneath a crooked tree on the edge of a ruined outpost. The desert sings a low, dry tune. You think of the empire's centre, far away, its polished halls and ritual order, and of this place, where the same flame flickers, but more faintly. And you wonder, can an empire stretch across so many worlds and still hold its shape? You lie back on the hard earth. The stars here feel sharper, more ancient. Somewhere, a caravan bell rings in the distance, and you drift into sleep with the scent of spice and dust in your hair. You awaken to the scent of parchment and olive oil, seated beneath a modest awning in a bustling border town near Armenia. The air is cooler here, tinged with mountain wind, and the voices you hear speak not only Persian but Armenian, Greek, and Syriac. This is a place of junctions, of old roads and new tensions, and today, something rare is happening. Diplomacy. You're here as a quiet observer, watching the preparations for a meeting between Persia and Rome. Or, more precisely, between a Sassanid envoy and the Armenian court. At the heart of it all is a woman princess Gurdafarid, daughter of a lesser noble house but sharp of tongue and rich in reputation. Her reputation precedes her. They say she once debated a Greek scholar into silence before breakfast, that she can recite Persian law and quote Aristotle in the same breath. You're sceptical until she enters the chamber. Her presence is not loud, but it gathers attention like silk gathers light. The meeting begins with formalities. Gifts are exchanged, embroidered cloaks, lacquered boxes, a falcon trained to hunt in silence. You marvel at the careful choreography of peace. Every word is measured, every smile just shy of sincerity. And then Gurdafarid speaks. Her voice is soft, but clear. She addresses the Armenian nobles first, then the Roman envoys. She speaks of borders as rivers, not walls, of shared histories, not divided loyalties. She references treaties from decades past, some honoured, some ignored, and proposes new ones with wording so precise it could be carved into stone. It's not flattery, it's precision. You can almost see the Roman delegate shift in his chair, caught off guard by the elegance of her argument. That day, no war is declared, no army marches. Instead, ink is pressed into parchment, and hands are clasped in solemn promise. It's a fragile peace, as all peace is but one shaped, in part, by a woman whose name may not survive the centuries. Historians still debate her exact role. Was she truly a diplomat, or merely a symbol propped by the court? But even if her deeds were shaped by scribes, you feel her presence linger in this moment, in this space between conflict and compromise. You spend the next few days wandering through Armenia's shifting terrain. One morning, mist curls over mountain peaks as you walk beneath a monastery's stone archway. Inside, Christian monks chant softly in a dim chamber, their robes worn but clean. You notice Zoroastrian symbols still etched into the stone remnants of a time when religious identities were not so sharply drawn. You speak with a monk who once served as a court astrologer. He tells you that stars mean different things here. In Persia, they mark fate. He says, here. They whisper grace. Armenia is a hinge between worlds, between Persia and Rome, between fire temples and cross-shaped chapels, and it has been the subject of many diplomatic struggles. You overhear stories of pressure from both sides, of local rulers switching allegiances like cloaks depending on the season. Back in the Sassanid court, the response to these dealings is measured. The new Shah, Yazdegerd II, takes an interest in these border politics. He strengthens garrisons, sends emissaries to enforce Zoroastrian orthodoxy, and dispatches letters heavy with both blessing and warning. One such letter, you learn, urges Armenian nobles to adopt the Sassanid faith more openly. The result is rebellion Armenia, proud and fiercely independent, resists. Battles break out, churches burn, treaties unravel. You sit with a wounded soldier beneath a pine tree after one such skirmish. He has an Armenian accent and wears a Sassanid uniform. I fight for land, he says softly, not for fire or cross. You realize then that empire is never as simple as maps suggest. Borders are drawn with ink but lived in blood and breath. As evening settles, you return to a hillside above the town where the negotiations took place. The parchment still exists, somewhere in a royal archive, perhaps. The falcon has long flown away, but Gurdafarid's words still echo in your ears. You close your eyes beneath the whisper of cypress trees, letting the memory of mountain wind and quiet diplomacy lull you into sleep. You awaken beneath a canopy of embroidered silk, light filtering through golden patterns onto the polished floor of a Sassanid palace. The air is thick with sandalwood and rosewater, and harp music floats gently from a nearby chamber. You're in the heart of courtly splendour now, where titles echo like prayers and crowns, are not merely worn but revered as symbols of cosmic order. This is the age of divine kingship in full bloom. You rise to find yourself amid an elaborate coronation ceremony. Incense coils upward from silver censers as nobles file in with jewelled belts and tall, tiered hats. At the centre, the new King Yazdegerd II stands robed in gold-threaded linen. His crown is impossibly tall, balanced like a temple spire atop a lattice of curls and velvet. You marvel at the attention to detail. Even the king's boots are embossed with tiny flames, and his sceptre glints with a gemstone said to have been mined under a lunar eclipse. It's all deliberate, every gesture, every object, designed to radiate far, the divine glory that legitimizes a ruler's power. The ceremony is long, almost trance-like. Priests chant from the Avesta, invoking the protection of Ahura Mazda. Coins are struck with the new king's profile. Fire temple altars are rekindled, and messengers are dispatched across the empire to proclaim the coronation in towns, cities, and distant villages. And yet, amid all this splendour, a quiet debate simmers in scholarly corners. How much power does the king really hold? You sit in a shaded archive later that day, parchment cool beneath your fingers, as two historians argue over tea. One insists that the Sassanid monarch is a god-touch sovereign, ruler of both material and spiritual realms. The other smiles and points out the influence of the magi, the priestly class, and the growing bureaucracy that surrounds every royal decision. The king speaks, he says softly, but often through many mouths. The conversation lingers with you as you explore the palace. You see how courtiers bow lower with every passing year, how edicts now begin with invocations longer than the law itself. You watch nobles consult star charts before decisions, and officials quote verses to justify land disputes. And still, life pulses beyond the palace walls. You visit a noble estate on the outskirts of Ctesiphon, where gardens bloom with quince, almond, and fragrant herbs. The host, a middle-ranking courtier, speaks proudly of the Quadi Namag, the royal chronicle being compiled. It will tell the tales of kings past and present, framing each as both warrior and wise man. You catch a glimpse of the manuscript illuminated with images of royal hunts, divine investitures, and idealized justice. But the stories, you notice, are curated. No mention of failed campaigns, famines, or peasant revolts. History here is a mirror polished by the court's hand. You also witness the rituals of court etiquette, so intricate they feel almost theatrical. Bowing, silence at key moments, the precise number of steps allowed when approaching the throne. It's as though even the air inside the palace has rules. And yet, not all is solemn. During a feast, you watch the king laugh. A jester, yes. Even the Sassanid court has its fools, performs a story about a farmer who mistakenly harvests royal wheat and hides it inside a clay ox. The room chuckles, and even the king's advisors allow themselves a smile. Moments like these, rare and delicate, remind you that beneath the crown is still a man. You retire that evening to a guest chamber lit by a single oil lamp. The walls are painted with scenes from the Shahnameh heroes slaying monsters, lovers riding beneath starlight, kings holding court beneath great trees. You trace a finger over a scene of Khosrow and Shirin, though they haven't arrived in your journey yet. Outside, the sounds of the palace continue. Soft footsteps, distant song, a scribal quill scratching late into the night. You reflect on what you've seen, how divine kingship is part ceremony, part myth, part function, how much is truly divine, and how much is performance, crafted over centuries like a crown balanced atop the head of an empire. You don't have the answer, but you sleep deeply, the perfume of jasmine and ink wrapping gently around your thoughts. You awaken before dawn, when the stars are just beginning to fade and the desert chill still lingers. The palace is quiet, unnaturally so. Even the birds seem to hold their breath. A fire burns low in a brazier beside you, and its faint glow catches on the gold trim of ceremonial robes folded neatly nearby. Today, a king is to be crowned. But not just any king. You're about to witness something whispered in legend and puzzled over by scholars for centuries, a coronation that begins before the child is even born. Shapur I, future ruler of extraordinary longevity and strength, is said to have been crowned while still in his mother's womb. You blink in disbelief as you hear the priest recite the ritual, placing the royal crown gently on a cushion and announcing him as Shahanshah, King of Kings, even though he has not yet drawn his first breath. You wonder, is this symbolic a metaphor, a bit of royal myth-making? Historians continue to debate. Was the unborn child really named ruler because the nobles feared civil war and had no other candidate? Or was this tale a clever piece of propaganda, designed to give his future reign an aura of divine inevitability? Regardless of the truth, you watch as the ceremony proceeds, lavish, solemn, and strangely moving. It is not the absence of the king that strikes you, but the intense presence of expectation. The fire temples ring their bells, coins are minted bearing the royal symbol, and a silk canopy is erected to mark the palace nursery where the queen rests, hand on her growing belly. In time, the child is born. And from the start, he seems to grow into the myth surrounding him. You walk beside him first as a curious onlooker, later as a quiet observer of state, as Shapur II becomes one of the most powerful and long-reigning monarchs in Persian history. He takes the throne formally as a teenager, but his presence is sharp, deliberate. You witness his early reforms, military preparations, tax adjustments, and religious reaffirmation. He's not merely a ceremonial king, he is active, alert, and surprisingly harsh for one so young. And soon, he turns his gaze westward. The Roman Empire is again in turmoil. It is the early 4th century now, and Constantine has only recently made Christianity the state religion. You watch as Shapur responds not with war yet, but with quiet restructuring. He strengthens fortifications along the Euphrates, restores weakened fire temples, and tightens the state's hold on dissenting regions. But tensions build. By the mid-century, conflict erupts again. You are there, a distant observer, when the Persian army lays siege to Amida in 359 AD. The Roman city resists fiercely. You feel the smoke sting your eyes from a hilltop as the city walls, blackened and crumbling, finally fall to the Sassanid force. The victory is costly. Thousands die. But Shapur emerges with renewed authority. You later hear of the campaign's horrors from a Roman captive historian named Ammianus Marcellinus, who survives the siege and records it in his own words. His writings are vivid, and you wonder, is this the other side of the same story? Is Shapur a righteous defender of Persia, or a ruthless conqueror? Perhaps both. In private, the king remains distant. You catch only glimpses, his dark robes trailing past guards, his advisors bowing deeply before they speak. Yet you learn that he was also a scholar of sorts, supporting the preservation of sacred texts, expanding courtly libraries, and continuing the compilation of Persian chronicles. One day, while visiting a remote fortress, you find a marble plaque inscribed with his motto, steadfast in fire, eternal in glory, and in truth, his reign feels eternal. For 70 years, Shapur rules. He outlives rivals, withstands invasions, and reshapes the empire with a steel-willed hand. By the time he dies, his legacy is carved into nearly every province, every road, every ritual. Yet despite his power, uncertainty remains. His strict enforcement of Zoroastrianism led to tensions with Christian communities, especially in Armenia and Mesopotamia. Stories persist of forced conversions, of martyrs whose names are still whispered in churches centuries later. Did Shapur order these acts, Or were they the work of zealous governors acting in his name? Once again, you see the veil between history and memory ripple. That night, you sleep beneath an arch carved during his reign, its keystone still bearing his lion insignia. The stars above you are the same ones Shapur once saw from the battlefield and the throne room alike. You close your eyes, knowing that while the empire endures, even its strongest kings eventually become stories carved in stone. You awaken beside a riverbank veiled in soft morning mist. The reeds sway gently as water laps at the stone embankment, and across the current, a caravan bridge stretches toward Mesopotamia. You're not alone. Columns of soldiers march nearby, their armor clinking softly like wind chimes in unison. You're moving west now, once again into the shifting realm of Rome. It is the mid-4th century, and Shapur II's strength continues to ripple across the land like the river before you. But Rome, though wounded, is never still. And here, on the eternal frontier between these two giants, ancient grudges flow back into battle. You cross into contested ground near the city of Singara, a dusty jewel on the edge of the empire. Roman garrisons are stationed nearby, stoic and wary. The soldiers speak in clipped Latin, but their eyes dart eastward toward the land where fire temples glow and banners rise with the lion and sun motif. Soon, war erupts once more. You watch from afar as the Sassanid army descends upon the Roman cities of the region. Shapur's campaigns are tireless. Amida, as you remember, has already fallen. Now he turns toward Nisibis, the symbolic and strategic jewel of Mesopotamia. Its walls are tall, its citizens proud. For months, the siege drags on. You find yourself among the engineers Persian and Indian, even a few reluctant Roman captives who are assembling siege towers taller than the date palms nearby. They dig channels, erect ramps, and wheel heavy wooden engines into position. The city resists, rain falls, disease spreads, and yet neither side yields. You sit beside a soldier one evening as he sharpens his blade by firelight. "This land," he says, "has been fought over since the gods first argued." You nod, understanding. It is less about territory now and more about memory, pride, legacy. Eventually, a treaty is struck. The Roman Emperor Jovian, newly installed and reeling from internal threats, agrees to a humiliating peace. He cedes not only Nisibis but several other border towns. You witness the transition Persian banners raised, Roman statues quietly removed, fire altars kindled where crosses once stood. And yet, even in this moment of Persian triumph, uncertainty flickers. You visit a Christian household in the former Roman quarter. Their icons are hidden now, tucked beneath floorboards or behind embroidered curtains. A child shows you a tiny silver cross threaded through a string of pearls. "Her mother's," she says. "We still pray," the mother whispers, just softly. Shapur's policies toward Christians are complex. In Armenia, he has faced rebellion sparked in part by his efforts to impose Zoroastrian rituals. In Mesopotamia, Christian populations live under watchful eyes. Some scholars argue that Shapur II encouraged persecution. Others suggest it was local governors acting in zeal. The truth, as always, lies in the murky middle. You travel north to Armenia shortly afterward and witness the uneasy relationship between culture and control. Here, the Christian faith has become both a religion and a form of resistance. Churches stand firm, but their clergy walk in fear. You meet one bishop who tells you, "We are the nails in the board. The harder they strike, the deeper we stay. Still, Persia's fire burns strong." Shapur institutes reforms that extend beyond warfare. You observe the royal census being taken in a provincial town, scribes recording names, livestock taxes owed. The empire is becoming more precise, more centralized. Roads are maintained. Trade is brisk. The court's reach stretches into every province. In Ctesiphon, Shapur receives envoys from distant lands, Arab sheikhs, Indian merchants, even emissaries from a tentative alliance with nomadic peoples of Central Asia. You watch as silk is unfurled, pepper weighed, and a gold-cloaked visitor presents a gift said to be from the Emperor of China, a translucent bell that rings without being touched. One evening, you attend a quiet gathering in a palace garden. Poets read beneath oil lamps, their words reflecting both pride and weariness. One reads a verse you remember long after the lion roars not for hunger, but to remember that it is still awake. And truly, Persia under Shapur II is awake strong, proud, but ever watchful. His 70-year reign is nearing its end. His figure, once tall and unyielding, moves slower now, but his mind is sharp, and his legacy enormous. You sit beneath a date tree outside the capital, scribbling your own thoughts into a worn journal. The empire feels poised, solid and structured, yet bracing quietly for what may come next. No king lives forever, and even divine fire eventually returns to ash. But for now, the flames still rise, and the border, though scarred, remains under Persian watch. You close your eyes with the hum of Roman and Persian voices mingling in your ears, one ancient harmony, still unresolved. You awaken in a chamber lined with scrolls, the scent of ink and warm parchment rising like morning incense. Outside, the sun climbs slowly over Ctesiphon's brick towers, casting long, golden beams across the tiled roofs. Today, your path leads not to palaces or battlefields, but to the libraries and quiet minds that preserve Persia's flame in word and wisdom. This is the heart of Sassanid scholarship. You find yourself in the royal archives, a dim, hushed sanctum where scribes labour with quiet reverence. Their reed pens dance across sheets of vellum, tracing characters in Middle Persian rounded, curling, elegant. Here, under royal patronage, old knowledge is gathered, copied, and translated with care. You sit beside a priest copying a section of the Avesta, the sacred text of Zoroastrianism. The fire crackles beside him, its flicker steady as he murmurs the verses under his breath while writing. The pages are written not just to preserve faith, but to protect order for the Sassanid court. Knowledge is a form of flame-bright, structured, divine, and yet you learn. The Avesta itself is incomplete. Stories linger of earlier versions, larger, richer collections of texts that once numbered in hundreds of chapters. Some say Alexander the Great burned them when he conquered Persepolis. Others whisper that scrolls were lost in Parthian wars, or buried under now ruined temples. Historians still debate whether a full Avesta ever existed, or if it's a myth woven to explain the patchwork that survives. You attend a gathering of court scholars discussing these very uncertainties. Over cups of spiced wine, they argue gently about lost volumes, oral traditions, and the difficulty of preserving exact memory across generations. A flame passed hand to hand. One of them sighs, burns the fingertips. Still, the work continues. Shapur II, in his later years, had supported the reorganization of these texts. Now, during the reign of his successors Hormizd III and later Perozor I. The effort expands. You see not only religious texts, but translations of Indian mathematical treatises, Greek philosophical dialogues, and Babylonian astronomical charts. The intellectual world is not sealed, it is open like a flower, drawing in pollens from every land. One day, a visiting scholar from India shares stories of numbers that have no end, of stars that predict more than seasons. He speaks of time as a wheel rather than a line. The Persian court listens with quiet interest and carefully notes every word. You visit a secondary archive nestled beside a temple, where manuscripts are copied for distribution to provincial fire temples and noble houses. Here, the scribes are younger, the ink more smudged, but the passion just as strong. You help carry fresh parchment, warm from sun drying, and exchange a smile with a girl who tells you she's copying hymns older than the mountains. In these quiet corners of the empire, you begin to feel something that the grand courts often conceal: continuity. The work of preserving language, wisdom, and sacred law moves at a slow, patient pace. But it does not stop. Still, even in the realm of scholarship, uncertainty stirs. One philosopher expresses doubt about the perfection of the cosmos. If all is ordered, he asks softly, why does memory fail? Another worries aloud about the empire's growing rigidity. That knowledge is being framed more as decree than discovery. You later meet a wandering bard who sings poems in an older dialect. He carries no scrolls, only verses in his voice. What's written can burn, he tells you. What's sung stays in the wind. And you realize there are many ways to preserve a flame. That night, in a quiet stone chamber, you rest your head beside an unfinished manuscript. Its script trails off mid-verse, as if the scribe paused for breath and never returned. You run your finger along the last line. The fire does not speak, but it remembers. You fall asleep with the rustle of parchment as your lullaby, the library sighing softly around you like an old storyteller gently closing a book. You awaken beneath the towering arches of a mountain monastery in Armenia. A cold wind tugs at your sleeves, and bells echo distantly through the ravine. The stones beneath you are damp with morning dew, and incense clings to the air like a dream that hasn't quite left. You are once again on Persia's western frontier where empires meet. Faiths entwine, and loyalties shift like the seasons. Armenia is not just a neighbour, it's a chess piece, a bridge, a wedge. And today, it is under Sassanid rule, at least on paper. You step into a chapel where flickering candles illuminate faded frescoes. Beneath one arch, a cross is painted directly over an older Zoroastrian symbol. 2 wings, a crown, a flame. Layers of belief stacked atop one another, like sediment in a riverbed. Christianity in Armenia has taken root deeply, more than in any other region near the Sassanid realm. You hear hymns sung in soft Armenian. You see monks wrapped in woolen cloaks whispering prayers to a risen Christ. And yet, overhead, Persian soldiers keep watch. Their orders are to ensure harmony, but what they are really guarding against is defiance. At the heart of this tension is religion Zoroastrianism versus Christianity, or, more precisely, identity versus influence. The Sassanid court views Christianity as a potential political threat, a sign of creeping Roman alignment. They fear that Christian Armenians might shift their loyalties toward Constantinople rather than Ctesiphon. And so, under Yazdegerd II and others, the state applies pressure conversion ceremonies, public rituals, and the quiet expectation that fire temples should rise where churches once stood. You attend one such ritual, a procession, where the sacred fire is brought into a newly claimed Armenian town. The villagers watch in silence. No one protests, but neither do they celebrate. One young boy clutches a wooden cross in his coat pocket. He doesn't show it, but he holds it tight. You later speak with a local priest in hiding. He tells you of secret baptisms held in caves, of scripture smuggled under flour sacks, of families torn between cultural duty and spiritual devotion. We honour the king, he says gently, but we kneel to someone else. The pressure leads to rebellion. In the mid-5th century, under the leadership of Vardan Mamikonian, the Armenian nobility rises against Persian demands. The Battle of Avarea becomes a watershed moment. You ride in a supply caravan trailing the rebel army donkeys heavy with grain, men singing ancestral ballads as they sharpen their blades. The battle, when it comes, is brutal. You remain on a nearby ridge, hearing the shouts and the clanging steel echo off the valley walls. The Persian forces are larger, better equipped. Vardan is killed, and the Armenians are defeated. But something strange happens afterward. Despite the loss, the rebellion is remembered as a victory of faith. The Persians, perhaps exhausted or wary of further unrest, gradually relax their push for religious conformity in Armenia. Christianity is not eradicated, it endures. Historians still puzzle over this outcome. Why would the Sassanids allow such open defiance to linger? Was it pragmatism, fatigue, or perhaps an unspoken acknowledgement of Armenia's uniqueness? You think of Vardan's legacy as you pass his stone likeness carved into a mountainside. His eyes are stern, his sword sheathed, his feet planted as if to say, I did not move, even when the earth did. Later, in a quiet village at the foot of the hills, you join a family for supper. The father is a weaver, his wife a singer of lullabies passed down through generations. They do not speak of war or empires. They speak of sheep, of river crossings, of when to plant saffron. But in the corner of the room stands both a cross and a fire altar, carefully positioned, quietly coexisting. You wonder how many households across this vast empire look like this, layered, complex, quietly resilient. That night, you sleep in a guest cell of the monastery. A candle flickers on the ledge, and the wind whistles through the stones. You dream of mountains and flickering flames, and of languages sung not in battle, but in prayer. You awaken to laughter, the clink of goblets, and the rich perfume of roasted dates and saffron stew. Tonight, you're not in a temple or archive, but in the heart of a courtly banquet, one of the grand feasts that define the rhythms of elite Sassanid life. The hall is warm and glowing, walls painted with peacocks and grapevines, the floor soft beneath your bare feet. Long tables stretch across the room, low to the ground and layered in silk. On them sit silver platters piled high with apricots, almonds, pomegranates split open like rubies. Musicians pluck melodies from harps, the notes floating gently above the quiet chatter of nobles. You take your place among them, a guest cloaked in borrowed robes, and let the night unfold. This is the court of Kavadarul, or perhaps his son, Khosrow. The years pass softly in these halls, one festival melting into another, seasons marked by harvests and marriages, hunting excursions and quiet plots. Here, feasting is not merely indulgence, it is performance. Hospitality is a virtue, generosity, a signal of control. You watch as a platter of jewelled rice is passed. Each grain dyed a different hue: saffron, rosewater, pistachio green. A roasted lamb arrives next, carved tableside by a cook whose knife glints like a ceremonial dagger. Guests are offered not only food, but poetry. A court reciter stands and performs a newly composed verse about the king's hunting prowess. The rhyme is elegant, the metaphor perhaps a little too flattering. The king, reclining on cushions near the head of the table, chuckles softly. Let us hope the deer are as impressed as I am. The laughter that follows is genuine, though measured. In these halls, every word has a shadow, and beneath the warmth of the celebration, you sense tension flickering like the candles, quiet rivalries between noble families, subtle gestures exchanged behind goblets of wine, advisors seated just a touch too far from power. One official high-ranking, finely dressed smiles too much. Another has arrived late and remains uncharacteristically silent. A poet you spoke with earlier now appears withdrawn, his gaze fixed on the fire rather than the performance. Court life, you realize, is a tapestry woven from threads of both gold and suspicion. Later, you find yourself in the outer gardens, where the air is cooler and the perfume of night-blooming flowers mixes with the smoke of a distant brazier. Here, away from the banquet, the whispering begins. Two advisors talk beneath an arbor. They speak of succession, of whether the king's younger son might be favoured, despite tradition. He has charm, one says, but charm can be sharpened. You wander farther, overhearing a noblewoman's concern over a land grant in the east. Given, she says, to a man whose loyalty is far too Roman. Her voice is low, her jewellery glinting like tiny daggers in the moonlight. Courtly life is filled with beauty. Yes, but also manoeuvring. Even affection can be political. One guest tells you of a marriage arranged during a hunting trip, sealed not with vows but with the exchange of horses. That's how you know it's serious, he laughs. No one gives away a good horse without cause. You return to the banquet just as a group of dancers enters robes, swirling like wind-blown petals, fingers tipped with gold. The music changes, lilting into something older, a melody from the time of Ardashir, perhaps. Close your eyes and drift briefly, the notes brushing softly against your memory. When you open them again, the king is gone, retired to his private quarters, his place now guarded by a ceremonial blade stabbed into a mound of rice, a symbol that even absent, his will remains present. You stay for a while longer, watching as the feast slows and guests begin to drift into smaller circles, their words now slurred with wine or sharpened with intent. As you retreat to your guest chamber, you pass a servant gathering leftover figs. He smiles politely, tucks one into his robe, and vanishes down a hallway without a sound. You wonder what secrets the servants carry, how many histories they hold in silence. That night, beneath a velvet canopy stitched with silver thread, you lie awake for a time, thinking not of kings or crowns, but of glances exchanged and truths left unspoken, because in the Sassanid court, every banquet is a mirror, and every mirror, if stared at long enough, reveals more than it hides. You awaken to the sound of soft chanting, not in any tongue you immediately recognize, but in a flowing rhythm that feels as old as the mountains themselves. You're lying beneath a cedar tree, in a garden tucked behind a temple, in Shapur, a city unlike any other in the Sassanid world. Here, knowledge blooms like springtime jasmine, and the air itself seems charged with thought. This is no ordinary city. It's a sanctuary of study, of medicine, mathematics, and mystical reflection. You rise to find a quiet group gathered beneath a colonnade: Zoroastrian priests, Greek physicians, Indian astronomers, and Syriac Christian monks, all deep in discussion. They are debating the structure of the heavens. One points to a parchment filled with concentric circles, explaining how the planets follow divine orbits. Another counters, proposing that the stars move independently, like droplets on glass. A third simply says, "Truth is a ladder and we are climbing blindfolded." You sit and listen. These are not court debates or political manoeuvres. This is something older, and perhaps more essential: the Sassanid court's embrace of wisdom, no matter where it's found. Jundishapur's academy has become legendary, even in your time. Established during the reign of Shapur I and expanded under Khosrow I, it draws minds from across continents. Scholars speak not only in Middle Persian, but in Greek, Sanskrit, Syriac, and occasionally Chinese. Translators work side by side, not just interpreting words, but blending entire cosmologies. One physician shows you a scroll copied from an Indian medical text on pulse diagnosis, herbal tinctures, and surgical procedures with names as delicate as birdsong. Another presents a Greek manuscript on arithmetic, carefully annotated in Pahlavi script. "We borrow," he tells you with a smile, "but we repay in refinement." You're led into a hall where scholars measure time not just with sundials, but with water clocks. On a raised platform sits an astrolabe, intricate bronze, etched with tiny stars. A young apprentice explains how it can find the hour by reading the sky. It tells you where you are, he says, but also reminds you how far you've yet to go. In this place, mysticism and science walk hand in hand. Some say the soul is composed of fire and logic. Others say it spirals through time like a comet. You watch a Zoroastrian sage trace diagrams in the sand, explaining how ethical choices ripple across lives, perhaps even lifetimes. We're not judged by what we believe, he says, but by what our belief creates. Historians still puzzle over just how far-reaching the Academy's influence was. Was it truly a centre of global learning, or has its fame grown in retrospect? Did all these traditions harmonise, or simply exist in parallel? You walk the halls and feel the answer is both. Harmony may not have been perfect, but the effort to understand that was real. You take part in a quiet seminar in the courtyard that evening. The topic, whether music reflects the structure of the cosmos. One musician plucks a short melody on a sitar and asks if it mirrors planetary motion. A mathematician nods. A note is just a number you can hear. Later, you dine with a group of scholars. The conversation drifts from mathematics to metaphysics to the ethics of curiosity. One woman tells you of her dream to create a complete medical guide that blends Greek theory, Indian surgery, and Persian herbal lore. 3 trees, she says, grafted into one. And as the stars rise above Jundishapur, you understand that here, at the Empire's intellectual heart, no crown is needed to confer greatness. The pursuit of knowledge is itself a royal act. You rest that night in a guest chamber lined with scroll racks and half-finished charts. The walls are plain, the bed modest, but the room hums with presence. You dream of staircases made of light, each step a different question and a different answer. In Jundishapur, even dreams climb upward. You awaken to the smell of dust and camel sweat. Your bedroll laid beneath a canopy of date palms that flutter in the desert wind. The fire is down to its last embers, and across the stillness, the first call of a hawk echoes above the dunes. You're no longer near cities, nor temples, nor courts. You're riding with the wind now along the empire's edge. This is the frontier, where the Sassanid Empire's control stretches thin across sand, salt, and the suggestion of sovereignty. You've joined a small unit of scouts patrolling the southeastern desert, where the Persian plateau fades into the open unknown toward Arabia, toward the Indian Ocean, toward silence. The terrain is harsh, unforgiving. Water is everything. You share a flask with a grizzled veteran who tells you he's ridden this region since the time of Shapur II. He taps a map drawn not on parchment but memory, marking wells, old ruins, the skeleton of a fire temple that now serves only jackals. But it is not emptiness that worries him, it is movement. Raids have increased, small, sudden, without warning. The culprits Arab tribes beyond the empire's reach. Some cross for plunder, others, perhaps, for territory. You visit a watchtower that was struck weeks ago. The walls are blackened with smoke. An old banner lies buried beneath the sand. They didn't stay, the commander says grimly. They wanted to be remembered, and yet, these encounters are more than military events. They are cultural collisions. You meet a tribal elder whose people once traded freely with Persian merchants, exchanging frankincense for glass, wool for sugar. Now, he says, we are asked to kneel or vanish. His voice is tired, not angry. The Empire's response is complicated. Garrisons are reinforced. Forts are rebuilt with deeper wells and thicker gates. But there's also diplomacy, a network of treaties and oaths, tribal gifts, political marriages. You attend one such meeting beneath a vast desert tent where Persian envoys share sweet rice and turmeric-laced meat with Arab sheikhs. The conversation is slow, indirect, carried on waves of poetry and metaphor. You sit cross-legged beside a young interpreter. She tells you that half the work is not translating words, but tone. Everyone says what they do not say. She whispers. Later, you pass through a caravan station, more a collection of tents than a town where goods move faster than armies. Here, spices arrive from India, pearls from the Gulf, manuscripts from the East, and gossip from every direction. You sip hot date wine as a trader describes seeing Roman coins in a Yemeni market. The world, he says with a shrug, has no borders, and perhaps he's right, because despite official lines on maps, these borderlands pulse with life that the Empire cannot fully chart. The Sassanids rule the centre, yes, but the edges belong to wind and will. You join a scouting party across the salt flats, where the ground cracks beneath your boots and the sun turns even shadows white. Your guide stops suddenly, dismounts, and brushes sand from a faint engraving on a stone marker, an old imperial borderline, nearly erased. Still here, he says, but even the wind forgets. You find signs of settlement in the strangest places, a half-collapsed shrine with a fire basin, still dark with soot, a potter's kiln, abandoned but intact, a lone fig tree growing from the ruins of a garrison well. Life lingers here, out of habit or hope, and the mirages, oh, the mirages. You see whole cities shimmer in the distance, temples, towers, running water. At times, they seem almost real. One soldier swears he walked through one once. The gates opened, he says, and then closed again. But I don't think they were ours. That night, You camp beneath the stars, so sharp and numerous they seem to lean toward you. The desert is utterly still. Your fire flickers low, your companions asleep. You think of the Empire's centre, its great halls and rituals, and wonder how often they remember this edge. Perhaps they do, or perhaps not. But here, the Empire breathes differently, not through decree or doctrine, but through the sheer act of continuing, of walking, of watching, of writing your name in the sand, knowing it may be gone by morning. And still, you write it. You awaken beneath the shade of a cypress tree, in the royal gardens of a palace that hums not with conquest, but with conversation. The year is sometime in the mid-6th century, and Persia, under the reign of Khosrow Sassanid the Just, is quieter, more refined. The air smells of wet grass and cardamom tea. You hear not the clang of swords, but the rustle of silk and the murmuring of scholars. Khosrow Anushirvan is not a warrior in the mould of Shapur or Bahram. He prefers scrolls to spears, laws to legends. His name, Anushirvan, means immortal soul, and though flattery hangs on every royal title, something about it fits. You meet him only once, in passing tall, dignified, robed in pale green, eyes sharp but not unkind. He walks slowly through a library courtyard, trailed not by generals but by mathematicians and astronomers. It is here, under his patronage, that the Academy of Gundishapur reaches its golden age. You revisit the halls you once saw in their infancy, but now they are filled with voices from across the known world. Indian physicians teach anatomy beside Greek logicians, Nestorian Christians, expelled from Byzantium for their beliefs, find refuge here and share their medical knowledge freely. Translators move deftly between languages, turning ancient texts into Middle Persian for the court's review. You spend an afternoon watching one such translator render a Sanskrit astronomical treatise into Pahlavi. He pauses often, not from uncertainty, but from reverence. Each word he tells you is a world. You nod, understanding. Khosrow's Persia is built not only of stone and coin, but of ideas. Outside, in the gardens, philosophy blossoms like the quince trees. A Syrian scholar presents theories of logic. An Indian monk shares thoughts on reincarnation. And through it all, the king listens, not just tolerating dissenting ideas, but welcoming them. You sit with a group of tax officials under a fig tree. They discuss a reform Khosrow has just introduced, the land tax, now calculated more fairly based on crop yields, not just property size. Farmers no longer fear arbitrary assessments. He's a gardener, not a butcher, one says, to general agreement. Still, not all approve. Some nobles grumble about the reforms. They've lost a degree of unchecked power. Others worry about the court's openness to foreign thought. Too many tongues in one mouth, one mutters during a private banquet. You lose the taste of your own language. You hear the priests of the Zoroastrian establishment voicing concerns as well. While Khosrow supports them publicly attending fire rituals, funding temple repairs, he also insists that no one faith dominate royal policy. Justice, he reportedly says, must serve all who pay its price. Historians still debate just how just Anushirvan truly was. Was he a benevolent reformer, or simply a calculating centralizer? Did he care for the people, or merely understand that stable subjects are more profitable, like the golden embroidery on his robe? The truth is hard to untangle, but beautiful nonetheless. You travel briefly with one of his provincial inspectors, newly appointed, eyes alert, sandals dusty from long walks. He carries a notebook, not a sword. His job is to record complaints, audit taxes, listen to commoners. In one village, a cobbler hands him a scrap of parchment complaining that a noble's horses trample his shop's front step. The inspector nods, writes it down, and promises to raise it in the capital. Will the king hear it? Perhaps. In this empire, word travels far and fast, but so does time. Back in the city, you visit a palace garden designed like a miniature paradise for rivers, one each of water, wine, milk, and honey, divided into quadrants by stone paths. It's symbolic. Of course, Persia's vision of order made into landscape. Children run through it now, laughing, utterly unaware of its philosophy. You watch them and think of Khosrow's idea of kingship, measured, thoughtful, less adorned by the sword than by the pen. A rare thing in any age. That night, beneath a carved cedar ceiling, you sleep among scrolls and flower-scented air. There are no drums, no marching boots, only the quiet pulse of a mind seeking fairness in an empire that still listens. You awaken in a city that is no longer sleeping. Ctesiphon, that grand and storied capital beside the Tigris, murmurs with unease. Its markets open late, its temples pray longer, and its nobles no longer speak of poetry in the gardens, but of Byzantium ever creeping, ever watching. It is the early 7th century, and Persia's golden glow is beginning to flicker. The reign of Khosrow II, called Parviz, the victorious, has brought both dazzling triumphs and cracks beneath the marble. At first, the victories are astonishing. You remember the celebrations as the Sassanid armies, under Khosrow's command, swept westward with terrifying speed. Antioch, Jerusalem, even Alexandria, all fall into Persian hands. The empire stretches farther than it has in centuries. You recall fire altars lit in Roman churches, Persian banners fluttering over Mediterranean cities. At court, the news is greeted with jubilation. You attend one of the feasts, a more lavish affair than any you've seen. Gold-dipped dates, sweet wine cooled with a mountain snow, dancers draped in silk like starlight. The nobles cheer, poets declare the return of Achaemenid glory, and Khosrow sits still at the head of it all, robed in crimson and silence, but something feels off. The cheers are too loud. The firelight flickers in strange ways, and soon the tide turns. The Byzantine Emperor Heraclius, at first mocked as weak and ineffectual rallies, he strikes deep into Persia's heartland in a series of swift, punishing campaigns. You follow the news with dread as Roman forces cross terrain once considered impenetrable. Cities fall, allies falter, and the great fire temples of the Western Empire are darkened one by one. You stand on a hill as Heraclius burns Dastagerd, one of Khosrow's royal palaces. The smoke hangs in the air for days, like the ghost of a lost promise. The Persian troops retreat, not in chaos, but in silence. They are tired, so very tired. Back in Ctesiphon, you walk through the streets and feel it in the stone. Shopkeepers speak in whispers. A beggar clutches an empty incense pot, muttering prayers not to Ahura Mazda, but to whoever might listen. The empire is not collapsing, not yet, but something sacred feels unthreaded. Inside the palace, Khosrow grows more withdrawn. You glimpse him once from a balcony, his once proud beard streaked with grey, his crown too heavy even for its stand. Rumours swirl, of paranoia, of purges, of sons imprisoned, of courtiers sent into exile for asking the wrong questions. One day, the Erkavad II rises in rebellion. The palace shifts overnight. Khosrow is arrested, dethroned, and imprisoned in a remote chamber. You walk past the gates as the announcement is made. No cheers, just a strange, uncertain hush. Soon after, Khosrow is executed, not in battle, not in ceremony, simply removed. Historians still argue whether it was mercy or murder, whether Kavad acted from justice, fear, or ambition, whether Khosrow's downfall was earned, or the inevitable end of all emperors who fly too close to the sun. But the damage is done. You move through an empire that feels thinner now. The provinces begin to loosen. The bureaucracy still works, but the messengers seem slower. The priests still preach, but even their fire seems dimmed, and the Byzantines, for now, withdraw. But their retreat is not relief. It leaves behind an empire shaken, exhausted, cracked at its foundation. You travel to a fire temple near the southern hills. The head priest, a gentle man with tired eyes, places a new log on the altar. The fire still burns. He tells you quietly, but the wind grows strong. That night, in a village near the Tigris, you sleep beside a child reciting prayers you recognize and some you don't. His mother tells you they've combined Zoroastrian chants with lullabies from Armenia and hymns from a Christian neighbor. He sleeps better this way, she says, smiling faintly, and as you drift off beneath an open sky, you realize the flame is still here, but it wavers now. No longer towering and defiant, just a warm ember, shielded by tired hands. You awaken to quiet, the kind of quiet that hangs not just in the air, but in the bones of an entire civilization. It is the year 651 AD, and you're no longer in a triumphant court or a humming archive. You stand at the twilight of the Sassanid Empire. The cities are still here, the rivers still flow, but the flame that once blazed across 3 centuries has guttered low. You walk through what remains of the royal compound at Istaka. It is not ruined, but it feels abandoned by the future. Dust has settled where scribes once bent over parchments. The great draperies have been pulled down. The throne hall is cool, shadowed, almost dreaming, and somewhere far away, and yet very near, rides Yazdegerd III, the last Sassanid king. He is young. Too young, perhaps, for the burden laid on his shoulders. You never meet him directly, but you follow his path like a whisper. From Ctesiphon, where he fled as Arab armies approached, to Estaka, to Kerman, and finally to Merv in the far northeast. Each city, a step in the empire's final retreat. The Arab conquests, swift and relentless, have begun to swallow Persia. You hear conflicting tales of what happened at Al-Qadisiyah and Nihavan battles that shattered the old military order. Some say the Persians fought bravely, others that their elephants panicked. Some say divine will guided the Arab armies, others that exhaustion and time defeated Persia more than swords ever could. Historians debate each detail. What is certain is this: the fire temples are falling. The empire is no longer the centre, it is now the memory. You reach Merv days after Yazdegerd has been betrayed. The last king of kings is dead, assassinated while seeking refuge. Not in battle, not surrounded by courtly dignity, but alone, in a mill, his crown traded for coins. There is no final ceremony, no carved relief, just silence. And yet, not quite silence, because Persia endures. You walk through a small village where a child practices writing Pahlavi letters in the sand. An old woman still whispers the Gathas before her morning tea. A fire temple, shuttered but not destroyed, glows faintly in a hillside cave, watched by a lone keeper with silver in his beard and a reed flute beside his bedroll. These are not kings, but they remember. A priest you meet in hiding says that Ahura Mazda cannot be erased by conquest. The truth, he says gently, does not need marble. It needs memory. He tends a modest flame, far smaller than the ones that once crowned imperial temples, but just as carefully guarded. In time, new rulers will rise. Islam will reshape the land, its call to prayer echoing across the very rooftops that once heard Zoroastrian chants. But even as the political order changes, the soul of Persia, its art, language, poetry, and wonder refuses to vanish. You find its echoes in garden walls still built with Sassanid symmetry, in rugs woven with fire altar patterns long after their meaning is forgotten, in stories of Bahram Gur, of Khosrow and Shirin, of Shapur and his captured emperor, told by firelight to children too young to understand the weight of what they've inherited. And so you walk once more along the river banks, the earth warm beneath your feet, the reeds bowing in the breeze. You carry with you the memories of an empire that once ruled from the Tigris to the Indus, whose kings called themselves divine, whose priests tended flame as if it were life itself. The Sassanid Empire has ended, but it has not disappeared. And now, my dear sleepy listener, let the story settle in your thoughts like embers in a hearth. Let the cities, the scholars, the gardens, the golden crowns, all fold softly into shadow. You've travelled far tonight through centuries of peace, brilliance, struggle, and change, through palaces and deserts, temples and frontiers. You may not remember every name when you awaken. You don't need to. The story has done its work. It has warmed you, guided you, kept you company while the world quieted down. So rest now. Let your breathing slow. Let the images drift, like silk banners carried gently on the wind. Persia's eternal flame may flicker in history's halls, but tonight it glows softly for you. Good night.